This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. We are now in the 2020s and have been for a little bit now. We've received some pretty great content, but whenever there's a new decade, it means a new era for Sonic. A lot of people look at the 2000s, the Sonic Dark Age, and now that we're in the 2020s, we've been looking back at the 2010s as the meta era. Time has gone on, people have been looking back at the meta era, and while there are a lot of fans of these games as there are a lot of really great titles, there's been a very vocal group of fans that are very displeased with this era of Sonic. Complaints often levied at it is its storytelling, depictions of the characters, overall gameplay, a plethora of other things, but much like everything related to Sonic, there are going to be fans of it and they're going to be not so happy people, and that's kind of just what you have to roll with. I'm not a meta era stan, but I'm also not somebody who will constantly defend it, as there are a lot of titles here that I am not a fan of, and I think this era has done a lot of harm to the franchise. But I also don't think it's been as bad as a lot of people say, and I think a lot of people who are quote-unquote Dark Age fans come at this era of Sonic with a lot of hypocrisy. So today, I want to take a look at the Sonic the Hedgehog meta era, and probably to determine if it was as bad as people say. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. If you've heard of Raid Shadow Legends, you know it's got a ton of champions, over 600 now, but it's also got an insane variety of bosses too. Let's put some of those guys in the spotlight today. You know him, you love him, it's Hellraiser the Dragon, the guy from the opening cutscene and Raid, an occupant of the Dragon's Lair dungeon. Let's talk about how you can beat him. The Dragon's got two main tricks, Terrible Breath and a host of debuffs, and it's a skill it'll use every few turns where it rears up and prepares to breathe on you. When it does that, a chunk of its health bar will turn purple, deal enough damage to remove the purple part of the health bar, and it will cancel the attack. Fail, and the next turn Hellraiser will deal super heavy damage and stun your whole team. He also puts out lots of decreased attack and poison debuffs with his other skills. Try bringing champions that can clear debuffs and put up shields if you want to try and tank Hellraiser's breath attack. Otherwise, bring heavy hitter champions that can rip away huge amounts of health in a very short amount of time. You can also do heavy damage with HP burn and poison debuffs, as Hellraiser has absolutely massive HP. There's also a ton happening with Raid this month. They're bringing out 5 badass looking new champions that I can't wait to get my hands on. They're overhauling the Champion Vault, and they got a load of awesome smaller updates as well. On top of that, Raid's running a huge series of Summer Splash events for the whole month where you can get your hands on some incredible skins for everyone's favorite dwarf, Trunda. But wait, there's more. Raid's currently running a special Daliana chase event where you can get your hands on the amazing Daliana, a brand new legendary champion from the High Elves faction, just by logging in. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and July 28th, and you'll get Daliana for free. That's it. Daliana is one of the strongest support champions in the entire game and can help carry your team to get past many of your Raid stuff or challenges. You don't want to miss her. The gifts keep coming. All new players, listen up. Once you're in game, just enter promo code MyDaliana and get your hands on everything simple. Get 50 XP brews to instantly get your legendary hero Daliana to max level 50, as well as a ton of silver. This is the best time to get started in Raid, and if you click my link in the description or scan my QR code here on the screen, you'll get unique bonuses worth $30. We're talking a free epic champion Terrell, 200k silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in game. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. So what are you waiting for? Download Raid Shadow Legends today. First, let's adjust the term meta era. I'm not sure if you could have told, but whenever I say the term meta era, the sense of cringe just flows through my body. Not only is this corny as hell, but it also is incredibly overused by fans. But the biggest offender is the fact that the term meta era isn't even a good title to give this era of Sonic. If you actually look at all the games and media we received this decade, rarely will you see anything that would fall under the category of meta. The definition of meta on Google of a creative work referring to itself or its conventions of its genre, self-referential. And I might be saying, well, Ricardo, while you're saying this, I got you, I have examples of this. Hold on there a bit, bucko. If you point at any of the Sonic the Hedgehog titles, including spin-offs, not only are they not self-aware, they are some of the most unself-aware pieces of Sonic media there's ever been.
Wow, he's got like 10 terabytes of selfies.
Bad jokes and corny writing doesn't equal meta, and I've seen the argument of, well, they call back to themselves all the time with nostalgia pandering. Not only does that not fall under the category of meta, that's called something else. It's the term nostalgia. This era was filled with nostalgia. So if you wanted to call this era anything, why wouldn't you call it the nostalgia era? As this entire decade of Sonic, it's just calling back to past games when Sonic was in his prime. 2 of them being made only for that reason, and they're the best ones. If you look at any of these games, they're not giving some kind of commentary on the Sonic series. They're not making fun of themselves. They're not joking on themselves. I feel people are just getting the goofy writing and not taking themselves seriously as meta, which isn't the case. The only things that could have been considered were remotely meta in this decade would be the Sonic Boom TV show and maybe the comics at some points. But even then, that's a spin-off series, not even related to the main. Did that have ramifications and we will be discussing that? Yes, of course we will. But I don't think that's enough for you to call this entire era meta. The only other thing that I see people pointing towards is the social media. I'm not gonna lie, guys, I'm very sick and tired of talking about the Sonic the Hedgehog social media and its teams. This is a very big talking point, especially in the Sonic droughts. And yes, the Sonic social media is meta, but also it's the Sonic social media. You know how small and insignificant that is? You can't dub an entire era of Sonic the meta era because they occasionally crack a couple unfunny jokes on Twitter. I'm sorry, but there is not enough stuff here for this name to be qualified. You guys can continue using it, but I'm not going to continue using it from this point forward. I'm either going to call this the Sonic 2010s or whatever I'm going to refer to it as. I'm not calling it the meta era, it's a dumb name, I'm over it. But let's talk about the actual content, shall we? Kicking off the decade was a very big title, Sonic Colors. This is a very big shifting point for the franchise as well, which may have lost a few people or not because they're still here for some reason. If you look at a lot of the games beforehand, they had much darker tones, much bigger scales, which I am a fan of. But I'm also going to allow this franchise to change and evolve for whatever is best for the franchise. And say what you will about these games, financially and critically, they weren't working, and fans at the time did not like them. They had every reason to change where the Sonic franchise was going, and I do not blame them, and I do not blame Sonic Colors. This game was everything the Sonic franchise needed, but because this was no longer the Sonic that classic fans, Dark Age fans, and Adventure fans grew up with, they were always going to look at this as a changing point, and that this franchise that was always supposed to be just for them in particular and surface their needs was now being shared to a different demographic. Sonic Colors is a very good game with issues like every other Sonic game before it. Does it have a smaller scale? Absolutely, yes. Does it have a bad story and dialogue? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, these are the characters that I still love, and the most important part, the gameplay, is fun to me. There's replayability here, it's not buggy, it's not inconsistent, it's fun, and that's all really a video game needs to be to me. If this isn't what you wanted and you don't like it, that's perfectly fine, you can think whatever you want, but just because it isn't the Sonic that you wanted doesn't mean you can write it off as bad. I enjoy Sonic Colors, and plenty of people enjoy Sonic Colors, and it's what the franchise needed, and to this day I still love the hell out of this game, but I don't love the hell out of it like I love the hell out of this next game. I think something almost everybody agrees with is the fact that Sonic Generations is the best Sonic game to come out of the 2010s. Almost every aspect of this game is amazing. It perfected the boost formula. Classic Sonic is actually so fun to play as, and I think is incredibly underrated. This was just a great time to be a Sonic fan. Sonic felt more confident than ever. They were finally getting things right. It was a nice string of solid titles. Was there a lack of story and a pretty presentation? Yeah, but I don't think that bogs down this being an amazing Sonic title that was well received by critics and fans across the board. Not just that, but it sold very well too. This is an absolute undeniable win for Sega and Sonic Team. I could go on forever and ever about how much I love Sonic Generations. It is undeniably one of the greatest Sonic games ever made, and it should always be remembered as such. Although the following year, 2012, didn't receive an actual Sonic game, we did get Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, which is still to this day considered one of the greatest kart racers of all time. But the next year is when things kind of started to resemble the last decade a bit. In the year 2003, a game called Sonic Heroes released. But no matter what you think of Sonic Heroes, you can't deny that this was kind of a weird point for the Sonic franchise. Did the game sell well? Absolutely, and at the end of the day, for Sega, that's what matters most. But it was seen as many to be one of the weakest main series Sonic titles, if not the weakest to that point. It was a departure for the adventure formula, which was working perfectly fine for Sega and Sonic Team at the time. This is in 2003, and 10 years later, a game very similar to that in terms of its reputation would follow, that being Sonic Lost World. Following two successful titles that were hailed as the renaissance of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sega decided to switch things up again for Sonic Lost World on the Nintendo Wii U. Why did I say just the Nintendo Wii U? Because this game was an exclusive to the Nintendo Wii U, at least at the time. Not only did this lead to Sonic Lost World being one of the worst selling Sonic games, which isn't entirely the fault of Sonic Lost World because it was on a very unsuccessful console, but it also received a massive mixed response. Some people liking the game, but many calling it very mediocre to just bad. This is the last thing Sega should have done with the Sonic franchise, and even though I don't dislike Sonic Lost World, in fact I find a lot of enjoyment in it, you can't deny that after having the success, you shouldn't be experimenting because it's going to lead to stuff like this, which further hurt Sonic's name. Even if it wasn't considered the worst Sonic game since Sonic 06, simply having a main series Sonic title come out to this mixed reception was not good, and its low sales and mediocre reception has led it to being one of, if not the most forgettable main series Sonic title. While I wouldn't call Sonic Lost World a total failure, I would also call it a misstep. Instead of fixing what wasn't broken, they should have took what was working and just evolved it for a new game. But unfortunately, after this misstep, Sega made the worst decision they could have possibly made. Look, I'm not a Sonic Boom hater. I didn't hate everything to come out of this side series. There's a lot of good stuff in Sonic Boom, but there's a lot of bad stuff as well, and the overall impact it had on the Sonic series can't be ignored. The first two Sonic Boom games were terrible, we all know that. The show was pretty good when it first started, but it aired at 7 in the morning on Cartoon Network, and viewership declined as the episodes went on. People just didn't want to wake up at 7 on a Saturday. The toys weren't selling, the comics were cancelled early. Everything about this was honestly a complete failure. I think the show was pretty good, like I said, the comics were pretty good. But man, this was a failure, completely tainted Sonic's name, almost causing Sega to completely restructure, leaving Sonic in the darkest place he probably was in his entire history. I know, I was coming at this video with the approach of, oh, the 2010s wasn't that bad. This was a massive road bump and couldn't be ignored. At this point, 2014, we're 5 years into this decade of Sonic. That's a solid half a decade, and I'd say 3 of those years were pretty squeaky clean and very solid for Sonic. One was kind of iffy and one was just utterly terrible. This all leads to 2015 being just kind of nothing. Although the year did give us the mobile game Sonic Runners developed by Sonic Team, which has gone on to have a cult following, it's a game that you can't play officially. That's right, Sonic Runners was removed only a few years later off of the App Store. It didn't do well. 2015 was one of the worst years to be a Sonic fan in my opinion. There was nothing. It was the definition of a drought. Sonic Boom really hurt the series. I think people don't realize how bad it was. But thankfully 2016 was a little bit better, and with Sonic's 25th anniversary we were all expecting a big return for the character. Well, we got the announcements of games like Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces, at the time known as Project Sonic 2017. The only game we got that year was Sonic Boom Fire and Ice. If you compare that to every other anniversary year, like Sonic Generations for the 20th, Sonic 06, say what you want about it, that's a big title, and we got more titles out of that for the 15th, Sonic Adventure 2 for the 10th, and then Sonic Boom Fire and Ice for the 25th. Yeah, this was easily the worst one. Sonic Boom Fire and Ice isn't a bad game, it's definitely the best out of all the Sonic Boom games, but still, it's not an amazing Sonic game, and not too many people remember it. There was a lot to be hopeful for in 2016, but in terms of the content we received, it wasn't amazing. But 2017 definitely made up for the lack of content we received the 2 years prior. We officially got Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces. Sonic Mania, which was developed by fans but officially licensed by Sega, effectively became the most critically acclaimed Sonic title since Sonic Adventure 2 all the way back in 2001, and has since gone on to be considered one of the greatest Sonic games of all time. It was an undoubtable success, but the last thing you can really call Sonic Mania, in my opinion, is a step forward. I love Sonic Mania, it is a great game, I'm not trying to take anything away from it. I'm not one of those people who don't consider it an official Sonic title or shouldn't be considered one of the Sonic games of the 2010s. It should, it's officially licensed, it is a real Sonic game. But this is a retro-inspired title meant to go back to Sonic's roots, which are from the 90s. This was by no means going to be Sonic's future, it was just kind of a nice revisiting of the past. What was supposed to be Sonic's future was the game that would release a few months after, that being Sonic Forces. I definitely want to go in depth with Sonic Forces at some point in its own video. I have never really given a solid stance on the game. I think it's well known that I don't like the game, but it's a very complex discussion, honestly. With that being said, in the brief amount of time we have in this video, I don't really think that Sonic Forces was a good step either, but I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. When I say that, I'm not talking about the game itself. I do think Sonic Forces is a very bad Sonic game, and it was probably the worst out of the main series in the 2010s. Unlike Sonic Lost World and Sonic Boom, I wouldn't call this a complete failure for the Sonic series and Sega as a whole. Sonic Forces sold pretty well for Sonic. It didn't get the worst critical reception from critics, just a kind of lackluster to mixed response, but not nearly as bad as a level as Sonic Lost World, which is kind of surprising because that game, in my opinion, is far more polished and fleshed out. Forces, in my opinion, has to be one of the most hollow, uninspired, boring experiences I have ever, experienced. After the failure of Sonic Boom and the whimper of Sonic Lost World, you can tell Sega wanted to take it as safe as possible, and oh boy did they. This has to be the most hated Sonic game right right now currently. If you're going to call a Sonic game out, you won't even hear the name Sonic 06 or Sonic Boom from fans anymore. You'll hear Forces. Instead of being so outrageously terrible it's fun to talk about, or just a simple good game, it is so by the numbers and hollow and straight to the point that it just feels like a waste of your time and money and effort to where it just makes you mad. Well, not a complete loss, because yes, it didn't get completely panned by critics and it sold pretty decently, and while yes, not completely panned by the critics, they didn't love it and the fan base hates it even more. But I'd still put this in the bad category, the failure category, because still, it's not a good game. Honestly, I'm being completely serious when I say this could have been the best year in Sonic history to that point. Sonic Mania was great, it was a big success, but it was completely overshadowed by Sonic Forces. It was a very productive year to be a Sonic fan, there was so much to talk about and go over, but at the end of the day, it was just a very muddy mixed year. Sega knew Sonic Mania was a success and the better title out of the two, so 2018 was the year to absolutely ride off on it, releasing a physical edition of Sonic Mania with DLC, as well as some animated shorts on YouTube. TSR was also announced, but that got delayed a year. I kind of feel this year how I feel about 2016. Yeah, we got an announcement on a racing game, but we just received the same game again, but we get to play as Mighty and Ray though. It was just, yeah, I don't know, 2018 was boring. So if you're keeping track, you know that 2019 is the last year of this decade for Sonic. It gave us Team Sonic Racing, and Team Sonic Racing is not a bad Sonic game, but it suffered from the same issues a lot of post-restructure Sega Sonic had. It's another budget Sonic title that's not very fleshed out, and honestly, the game died almost immediately. I'd say like a week after this game's release, no one was really talking about it, there was no content added after release, no DLC, and it was definitely the kind of game that needed it. There weren't a lot of tracks, there weren't a lot of characters, the story mode sucked, there was no online basically. I mean, there was, but no one was playing it. It definitely didn't go out on a bang, and that's kinda how this era ends. You can tell that this all started out very positively and then got very negative towards the end, right? So taking a look at all this, taking a look at all the games, the state of Sonic during a few of these years, was the Sonic meta era that bad? This by no means is a great decade for the character, and I wouldn't even say it's a completely positive one either. It's actually predominantly negative. But you know what? So is every other decade in Sonic history. I have always been the type of person to say Sonic has never been a franchise of consistency. The 90s started off very strong and then completely faded towards the end. Same with the 2000s, and the same applies here, all just kind of vary in terms of where they start and end. There's always bad Sonic games no matter where you go, there's always hard times for the franchise and character no matter where you go. The only reason we look back at some of these differently is because time after time again, Sonic is able to get himself back up off the floor and keep running. So in short, was this era that bad? I don't think it is that vastly different from the other decades of Sonic that are supposedly far superior. So no. Is there bad stuff here? Yes, absolutely, and there's things that really harm this character and that I will never forgive. But there's also a lot of great stuff here too that does need its recognition. Sonic is a franchise of inconsistency. That's just something we have to learn and accept. Not everything is going to be great and not everything's going to be bad either. Times change and Sonic changes. The 2020s are off to a completely different start from years prior. But me, I'm just excited to see where he's gonna go next.
Tell me you wanted some more, tell me